Baptist State Convention of North Carolina on the occasion of its 150th anniversary. The story of this great Baptist convention is a testament to its founders, Reverends William Warwick, Edward Eagles, C. Johnson, L.W. Boone, B.B. Spicer, H. Grimes, John Washington, Charles Bryant, Sutton Davis, and the Reverend R.H. Harper, the visionary men who founded the convention on October 18, 1867. Since its founding, Mr. Speaker, great men and great women have maintained the convention's strength and viability. The General Baptist State Convention is the oldest convention of African American Baptists in the United States of America. The General Baptist State Convention consists of more than 500,000 Baptist believers belonging to more than 1,400 churches, including my home church, the Jackson Chapel First Missionary Baptist Church of Wilson. The convention is subdivided into 58 associations, each presided over by a moderator. Over the last 150 years, the convention has been led by well-trained and spirit-led theologians. The current president and executive board chair is my friend, Dr. Niles M. Avery II of Salisbury, North Carolina. He is the 32nd president of the convention. And Mr. Speaker, at the conclusion of my remarks, I'm going to ask unanimous consent that a list of the current associations and past presidents be included in the record. But Mr. Speaker, the current officers of the convention are First Vice President at Large, Dr. Lorenzo Lynch, First Vice President, Dr. Ricky Banks, Second Vice President, Dr. J. Vincent Terry Sr., Third Vice President, Reverend O.D. Sykes, Fourth Vice President, Reverend Prince R. Rivers, Recording Secretary, Reverend Curtis O. Donnell, Assistant Recording Secretary, Reverend Matthew Rouse III, Statistician, Dr. Nathan Scovins, Parliamentarian, Reverend Reginald Wells, the historian is Dr. Harry L. White, and the hard-working Executive Secretary Treasurer is Dr. Haywood T. Gray. Mr. Speaker, the black church in North Carolina did not begin at the end of slavery. It became more pronounced and more transparent at slavery's end. Excuse me. But it existed for many years. It existed for many years prior to the end of slavery. In 1831, the North Carolina General Assembly passed a law making it a crime for any free person of color or slave to preach or exhort in public, or in any manner officiate as a preacher or teacher in any prayer meeting or other association for worship, where slaves of different families were collected together. Can you imagine? The punishment for preaching the gospel in 1831, beginning in 1831, was a crime. The punishment for violation was a whipping of up to 39 lashes on the bare back. Notwithstanding this prohibition against preaching, the black church existed as a secret association of slaves who worshiped privately. As the antebellum period proceeded, a few of the white churches, at the urging of the North Carolina Baptist State Convention, finally allowed people of color to hold church meetings under the supervision of a white person, and at times a member of the white race would conduct the service. Now, Mr. Speaker, when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed on January 1st of 1863 and the 13th Amendment ratified on December 6 of 1865, there were 4 million slaves who obtained their freedom. 300,000 of those lived in North Carolina. The former slaves, with assistance from white Northerners and the Freedmen's Bureau, began the struggle toward freedom and equality. It was the black church that led the way. This movement consisted of black Baptist leaders and black Methodist leaders and other religious leaders, both black and white, who understood the importance of the former slaves having the ability to worship and serve their God without fear. At the end of the Civil War, the former slaves built churches throughout North Carolina. Many were of the Baptist denomination, and they were erected with lightning speed. In 1867, they came together, Mr. Speaker, at First African Baptist Church in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and I have a picture of it on display. They came together at the First African Baptist Church in Goldsboro to form the General Association of Colored Baptists of North Carolina, which was the original name for the convention. And I might say, Mr. Speaker, that my grandfather, Reverend Fred Davis, would in 1916 become the fourth pastor of this church. Not only did Black Baptists build churches, but one of their greatest achievements was the establishment and maintenance of historic Shaw University in Raleigh, which will be discussed by my colleagues, Congressman David Price and Congresswoman Alma Adams in just a moment. Shaw University's contribution to African American empowerment must be known and understood by all North Carolinians. Those pioneers who were trained at Shaw University went into communities and established institutions and engaged in professions that empowered future generations. They went to all corners of our state. They went to Eastern North Carolina, Piedmont, North Carolina, Triad, the Fayetteville area, which is where our esteemed Sergeant at Arms grew up in Miss Joyce Hamlet, grew up in the Fayetteville area. There were many other areas that were covered by graduates from Shaw University. And I'm delighted to add to the record that many of our African American physicians and dentists and pharmacists and lawyers and ministers and teachers were also trained at Shaw University. And since my colleague, Dr. Alma Adams, Congresswoman Adams, was a former Bennett College professor, I'm going to yield to her to speak as she sees fit.
I want to thank the gentleman for yielding. I do rise to recognize the 150th anniversary of the General Baptist State Convention of North Carolina. I join my colleagues, Congressman Butterfield and Congressman Price, in congratulating them on the achievements and on the appointment of their 32nd president, Dr. Avery. In North Carolina, the convention partners with Shaw University, the oldest historically Black university in the South and one of the oldest in the nation. As a retired professor, as you heard, of Bennett College, 40 years in Greensboro, and founder of the Congressional Bipartisan HBCU Caucus, a member of the Education and Workforce Committee here in the Congress. It gives me great pride to reflect on the generous support that the convention gives to Shaw and its students. I spill a special attainment to Shaw, since that became what became my alma mater, North Carolina A&T, was located on Shaw's campus during its first year. Its history of leadership and activism and service is well documented, with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee founded on Shaw's campus in 1960, and the Center for Alternative Programs in Education, CAPE, had its beginnings there in 1980. I yield back, sir.
Thank you, Congresswoman Adams, for those very enlightening remarks, and thank you for your extraordinary leadership, not only here in the Congress, but for the 40 years that you spent in the classroom at Bennett College. You have been a trailblazer for sure.
Well, gentlemen,
we also have another congressman who is a former college professor, Dr. David Price, who represents the 4th Congressional District. Thank you for joining us tonight.
I thank my colleague, and I commend him for taking out this special order and giving Representative Adams and myself the opportunity to participate and to pay tribute to the General Baptist State Convention. The mention of Shaw University brings me to my feet, because I too want to reflect on this significant Baptist institution, which is in the 4th Congressional District in downtown Raleigh. Shaw has also recently celebrated its 150th anniversary, a history that parallels that of the Baptist State Convention. I was there last week in historic Esty Hall. I have to say that, yes, it's point out the historic building there on the campus. When I first came to the Congress in the 80s, my first appropriations earmark was for Esty Hall, and that, believe me, was just a little bit of seed money. But Shaw has restored that building in a beautiful way. The acting president of Shaw, Dr. Paulette Dillard, is doing a wonderful job of leading that university. But the occasion last week was an inaugural lecture, the Adam Clayton Powell Ella Baker lecture. That is going to be an annual occasion at Shaw. I was honored to give that lecture to a very lively group of students and faculty, and then we had a luncheon in Esty Hall afterwards, and a great discussion. Just liberal arts education at its best, and I appreciated being part of that occasion, and I certainly over the years have come to appreciate what Shaw means. A Baptist institution. It is tied very, very closely, and the Shaw Divinity School is affiliated. An institution that this convention has nurtured and that in turn has served thousands and thousands of people and enriched the life of North Carolina.
Thank you very much for those words, Congressman Price, and thank you for your leadership. I've now had a cup of water, so maybe I can get my words out. I've been suffering with bronchitis all week, but thank you so very much for your words, and thank you for your relationship with Shaw University, and I especially thank you for mentioning Esty Hall. For many of us who have grown up in North Carolina, we know the relevance and the importance of Shaw University. We know how Shaw University trained many, many hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals who came into communities all across North Carolina and made a difference. They came into the classroom and they taught elementary school and high schools all across our state. They went on to college campuses and became college professors. Many of them became lawyers because Shaw University had a law school during those days. And some became physicians and dentists. Some became pharmacists. Shaw University was a real educational engine, not just in North Carolina, but throughout the country during those very difficult days. And we say all of that to say that it was the Baptist Convention, the General Baptist State Convention and its predecessor, that helped enable Shaw University to be born. And Shaw University has done so much for so many. I recall as a child, my parents, Dr. Price and Dr. Adams, would tell me that they too attended Shaw University. My dad went to Shaw University from 1919 to 1923. My mother attended Shaw University for high school. During those days, African Americans did not have the benefit in most communities of a high school education, and so many of the young teens would go to Shaw for high school. And it was there at Shaw University that my parents met. My dad was in undergraduate school, and my mother was in the high school, and they met right on the porch here of Esty Hall back in 1919. And so thank you for raising up Shaw University and just telling the world what the Baptist Convention did by creating the environment where Shaw University could thrive. And so I want to thank both of you for coming to the floor. Do you have any concluding remarks, Dr. Adams?
Thank you, Congressman Butterfield. Just wanted to add that you were almost a Shaw Bear with your parents attending there. Just last year, I had the opportunity to address the Founders Day, and all the students there. Many firsts. Shaw boasts of the first college in the nation to offer a 4-year medical program, the first historically black college in the nation to open its doors to women, and the first historically black college in North Carolina to be granted an A rating by the State Department of Public Instruction. Over the years, as you said, many scholarships have been provided to those students. They've encouraged the students to not only attend their divinity school, but we find that many of them have become college presidents. The founder of North Carolina Central, the first president of Elizabeth City State and North Carolina A&T State University were all Shaw Bears, and we're delighted. So the lives that the General Baptist State Convention has touched throughout its existence is beyond admirable and almost beyond comprehension. I just recall, I want to close by this, saying that W.E.B. Du Bois reminded us that of all the civil rights for which the world has fought for 500 years, the right to learn is undoubtedly the most fundamental. So I praise the General Baptist State Convention and its commitment to education, and Shaw University as well, for their charitable giving, for their dedication to educating young people through these 150 years, a century and 5 decades. Thank you, and I yield back.
Very well said, Congresswoman Adams. Congressman Price, would you like to make concluding remarks?
Yes, and I thank my colleague for this opportunity. I would like to conclude by reflecting on some of the outstanding pastors that have led this convention and led the congregations that comprise this convention. I hesitate to name any because there are so many who have served so faithfully and so well. But I want to just share some memories, and I think our listeners in North Carolina will remember these people as well, and they exemplify what this convention has been all about and the leadership it has offered. Dr. Charles Ward, for example, long-term pastor of the First Baptist Church in Raleigh, a civil rights leader, a mentor to so many people over the years, a revered pastor, and I remember him so well as I first began to think about running for Congress and sought his counsel, and he unfailingly gave wise counsel and encouragement. He of course was a leader in the General Baptist State Convention. Reverend Lorenzo Lynch from Durham, North Carolina, another former leader of the convention. His son Leonzo is now the vice president of the convention. Leonzo Lynch is a powerful, prophetic preacher, had a huge impact on the city of Durham. The Durham Committee on the Affairs of Black People recently honored his lifetime achievements, and his daughter, former Attorney General Loretta Lynch, returned to Durham to be part of that recognition. I think of C.R. Edwards, former president of the convention, pastor for so many years of the First Baptist Church of Fayetteville, a longtime leader of the North Carolina General Assembly, special assistant to North Carolina's governors. Again, a mentor, a wise man, someone who was a good man and who knew how to bring out the best in others. I think of W.B. Lewis, who recently passed away, another former president of the convention. He was pastor for a long time of I say a long time, decades upon decades, of the First Cosmopolitan Baptist Church in Raleigh. He was a pioneer in figuring out how to work with the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, form a nonprofit corporation, build affordable housing, which to this day stands in Raleigh, rental housing for the elderly. And finally, I think of John R. Manley, 60 plus years as pastor of First Baptist Church in Chapel Hill, a dear friend of mine, another former president of the convention, by the way. That this was a pattern for these leading pastors to offer that kind of state leadership as they were offering local leadership. John Manley also was a champion of housing. Manley Estates stands right there in that community. And I know how hard John Manley worked on that because we work together. We have this housing in the community because of his vision, and we can go on, but this is such an impressive honor roll of leaders, pastors who have not only led their flocks, but they have led in the state and in many cases national religious organizations. The General Baptist State Convention has enabled millions of people over these years to deepen their faith and to express that faith in ministering to those whom Jesus called the least of these, and to advance the struggle for justice in this country. So I am proud to join my colleagues in this tribute tonight, and I say to the General Baptist State Convention of North Carolina, the many, many faithful members of the congregations, the leaders, may you go from strength to strength, and may you continue to preach the gospel powerfully and be a force for good and justice and right in our community. And I yield to my colleague.
Thank you, Congressman Price. How much time do we have remaining, Mr. Speaker?
The gentleman has 9 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are preparing to close. You know, as I was listening to Congressman Price a moment ago recite the names of those great men who have led the General Baptist State Convention, I could not help but to think that I, too, remember all of them. And then I glanced down at the list of presidents that I'm going to enter into the congressional record in just a few moments from now. And there have been 32 men who have served as presidents of this great convention. And I've had the privilege of knowing 12 of them. I did not realize that until I actually pulled out the list and started counting. C.R. Edwards, who Mr. Price recognized a moment ago, Joy Johnson and John Manley and E.B. Turner, and J.B. Humphrey and W.B. Lewis and Clifford A. Jones Sr. and John D. Fuller Sr. and Charles T. Bullock and Gregory K. Moss Sr., Howard W. Parker Jr., and the current president, Dr. Niles M. Avery II. And I might say, Mr. Speaker, that of these names that I just mentioned, 3 of those passed away in this calendar year. And so they have been great Baptists, and they have been great North Carolinians and great Americans. And so I want to thank my colleagues, and I want to thank the General Baptist State Convention for 150 years of incredible work in North Carolina. Thank you to the men and women, both clergy and lay, who keep this convention live and well. And Mr. Speaker, if I can close by simply using my dear uncle, my departed uncle, as but one example of a black preacher who gave his entire life to his ministry, Reverend F.L. Bullock of Enfield, born 1896, pastored 4 churches that were 1 Sunday per month churches. Married to my mother's sister, who was a teacher, he was paid very little. Every day of his life, Reverend Bullock would visit the sick and minister to the needs of his community. After serving as pastor for 64 long years, he was diagnosed with cancer. No health insurance, no life insurance, no pension from any of his churches. He died at age 84, several days after preaching his last sermon. And so, Mr. Speaker, thousands of pastors have devoted their entire life to the ministry. Many are remembered, but so many of them are not. Today, the 3 of us pay tribute to all of them from the floor of the United States House of Representatives. May God bless the memory of each of them for making our communities a better place to live. And may God continue to bless the General Baptist State Convention of North Carolina and its current leaders as they continue to serve God and his people of all races, creeds, and station in life. Thank you. I yield back.
Without objection, general leave is granted on the special order.